In 1946-1947, the band had a new director for the first time in 9 years. During Mr. Willis's absence, the band was under the leadership of Lillard Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell had been in Mr. Willis's bands from 1937 to 1941. He served as student director his senior year. After high school, he started a music education degree at Western Kentucky University. Mr. Willis had started offering summer band classes to supplement his students' progress, and he hired Mr. Luttrell to assist with those. Before finishing his degree, Mr. Luttrell went into service during the war. This clipping publicizing the 1944 spring concert mentions that the band was performing a composition by Mr. Luttrell. After he came out of the service, Mr. Luttrell finished his undergraduate degree at East Tennessee State University, where he met V.C. Adcock. When Mr. Willis left Central, he recommended Mr. Luttrell as his replacement.
The 47-48 band earned yet another superior rating at Concert Festival and also went to the newly reorganized State Festival held in Oak Ridge.
If you made a 1 in East, Middle, or West, then you went to the State Festival. You know, they gave you ratings. Now, the first one was in Oak Ridge, and it was the first year that I taught, 47-48. We had to send a list of everybody who was going to be on our buses, and they had to send us passes because it was still a closed city.
During the 1947-1948 year, it was finally decided to adopt new uniforms for the band. As before, these were purchased by each student. Although the school colors are red and black, Mr. Luttrell chose a gray uniform with red trim, starting a trend that would last for decades. Not until the mid-1980s would the band again wear uniforms that were primarily red and black.
Here are the officers for 48-49 modeling the new uniforms. Drum Major Colbert Petrie furnished this photo dated September 1948. The other officers are from left, Danny Baird, Jack Bannister, and Calvin Wallace. Here's Colbert with band sponsor Julia Hahn and the band on parade. Someone took this photo, had it made into a postcard, and mailed it to Colbert. The caption on the back reads, "Crack Central 48 Band makes debut on Gay Street." Following a successful, well-respected director is never easy. Lillard Luttrell may not be as well remembered today in Fountain City as Mr. Willis or Mr. Woodall, but he definitely kept the program on track during his tenure. Here's the annual photo from his last year, showing an approximately 100-piece band in their new uniforms. Things just seemed to work out at the end of 48-49. Mr. Luttrell was interested in pursuing a master's degree, and Mr. Willis was ready to return to Central. Mr. Luttrell married a Fountain City woman, went to Nashville, earned a master's degree from Peabody, and spent a long career teaching in South Carolina and Florida. He then returned to Tennessee, taught in Rogersville, Kingsport, and Gate City, Virginia. He retired to Kingsport and has now passed away. His widow still lives in Kingsport, and she has a sister who played for Mr. Willis in 1941 through 1945, Catherine Fielden. Ms. Fielden worked for years at Hughley's Music Store in downtown Knoxville, had a grandchild in the Central Band, and provided much of this information about Mr. Luttrell.
The style of marching bands, from the music they play, the uniforms they wear, to the design of the halftime shows, has gone through many fads and fashions over the years. Up through the end of the 1950s, bands would often make a formation that pictured something, then play a related tune, sometimes including props to get the message across. Band directors call this pageantry style, and Central's marching band often followed this approach.
The last year Lillard was there, they played at Evans Collins, Knox High School, and he did every holiday through the year and had something come out, you know. And then the last thing the announcer said was, well, they got everything on the field except the kitchen sink. And here came two guys out with a kitchen sink.
The 1948 annual showed the student body in the auditorium. As the spring 2004 students gather for an assembly, the auditorium is surprisingly unchanged 56 years later.
Mr. Willis returned in the fall of 1949. Upon his return, he was also appointed to the Supervisor of Instrumental Music position in Knox County. The 4950 band included Al Curtis on trombone. Al had an interesting career ahead of him. He spent time as a professional trombonist, including a stint with the Cole Brothers Circus Band and with a regional dance band, the Coy Tucker Orchestra. In yet another of a long series of multi-generational central band connections, two of Coy Tucker's great-grandchildren were seniors in the central band for 2004-2005. Meanwhile, Al Curtis became a part of the growing television scene in Knoxville. He was known to an entire generation of children who grew up watching local television in the 1950s as the birthday dog. He eventually served as general manager for the East Tennessee Public Television Station and also kept in the music business by forming a dance band of his own, the Al Curtis Orchestra. Paul Sherbakoff was for years the manager of the Knoxville Hyatt Regency and had been in the UT band with Al. He called one day to try out an idea he'd had.
At the time I called him to see if he'd play a tea dance for us, and he said he was just about to hang it up as a band. So I talked him into putting some more people back in it and come start a tea dance for us in 1977.
It was a huge success. The dances drew large crowds for years, as shown in this early 90s photo. I was already a regular saxophonist in Al's existing band, and the larger orchestra for the Hyatt performances was a very strong band that was lots of fun to play in. Al always revered Mr. Willis and spoke often of him to me years later. I planned to interview Al for this project, but he passed away in spring 2004, just as I was beginning this history. The annual football game with Knoxville High was a Thanksgiving Day tradition for years. One year, Mr. Willis and Fred DeRobertis, longtime Knox High band director, decided to combine forces to play the Star-Spangled Banner before the game. However, they neglected to make sure they were preparing the same arrangement, with the result that one band played in the key of A-flat and one in B-flat. Although probably not funny at the time, the two men enjoyed telling that story on themselves for years. This 4950 band also included the start of another long family band tradition. Snare drummer Joe Black. A Fountain City pediatrician, Dr. Black has also had 3 children and 3 grandchildren in the band.
I'm Joe Black, and I had the pleasure of being in Central High School Band from 1947 to 1951. First 2 years I was there, Mr. Luttrell was my band director, and then he left and Mr. Willis came on the scene. Well, we had heard an awful lot about Mr. Willis before he ever came. Without a doubt, this man was, without saying one word, when he walked in and got on the podium, that was the end of your talking. He would let them get by with certain things up to a point, and then when that point was reached, it was all over. It was all over. His discipline was second to none. I can still remember standing right here on this stage, always back in this corner, and they would always sit right up there. Now, this auditorium, you know, it brings back a lot of memories. I went to Smithwood School, and at that time, we did not have a program where you could play in a band or have any instruction or like they have it now, which is so good. So we had to do this on our own. The only instructor that we could find out about was Mr. Cottrell, C.C. Cottrell. He'd been there for years and years and years.
The name C.C. Cottrell caught my attention. Do you remember this photo of the first band from 2728? 2 directors are listed. One of them was C.C. Cottrell. Based on later photos, Mr. Cottrell is probably the younger director on the left. Although he never mentioned to Dr. Black any past connection with Central, we are both convinced that this was the same Mr. Cottrell who assisted Neil Gray in the late 1920s.
Everybody that played the drums, it didn't matter which high school you were in at this time, they had all taken from Mr. Cottrell.
However, for his final year in the band, Dr. Black did not end up playing snare drum after all.
I was supposed to play the cadence that day for the tryouts of for the drum majors. I didn't go out for it. I had no desire to, and so everybody else tried out, and Mr. Willis says, "Well, Joe, do you want to try out?" And I said, "I think it'd be fun." So I tried out, and then I was very surprised that I was appointed drum major.
So Dr. Black was the drum major for 1950-1951, his senior year at Central. This was Mr. Willis's second year back, and the band is looking very impressive.
It always amazed me how he could take this bunch of people and completely control them. And he did it not by coercion, but by respect. Everybody respected Mr. Willis.
We'll hear more later about some achievements from the rest of Dr. Black's family, but until this conversation, I didn't know that he was actually the start of 3 generations of all-state band percussionists at Central.
Mr. Willis came up to me and said, "Joe, there's a band up in Johnson City I want to send you to." And it was very competitive. And then I went from there then to Nashville as at the all-state band. But Mr. Willis had a way of doing this thing. He just came up to you one day and said, "I want you to go up to Johnson City." And that was it.
The student in the center is Bob Logan, who sent me this photo. On a band trip to Murfreesboro in 1950 or 51, on the left is Principal H.G. Lowy, on the right is Joe Black, who is probably very surprised and perhaps dismayed that this picture has survived. Nowadays, our students play games on their cell phones on band trips.
A milestone from 1950 to 1951 was, finally, a real band room, a white building adjoining Pruden Field that was dubbed the White Castle. The band had been meeting for years in a small room at the north end of the gymnasium. That old room today is the girls' locker room. This article from the December 1950 Centralite newspaper documents the band's move into its new home.
Well, I was at Young when they built that. I remember because O'Dell, he designed it and planned it, and he wanted a lot of space in front of the band so that he wouldn't be crowded and you get better sound, you know. And yeah, that was his pride and joy.
So proud of that office that he had, you know, just a little old cubby hole, just as you went in the room, the first one on the left. Instrument room was the second one. See, we never had an instrument room. Never, never.
When the Central campus became Gresham Junior High in the early 70s, a new, modern band room was built near the gym. This wing of the building, on the general location of the old annex, currently houses the band room, 2 computer labs, and an art room.
This photo, labeled 1951, shows the band on parade on Gay Street in downtown Knoxville. The band is directly in front of the old Riviera Theater. A sign for Clark Jones Music Store, where Mr. Willis worked in the late 1940s, can also be seen here.
This 1951-1952 band played a concert tour in Nashville and gave a special exhibition concert in Lexington for the Kentucky State Band Festival. The drum major was Jack Thurman, whose son David was a trumpet player and also a drum major for us at Central in the 1980s. Although playing baritone horn here, Jack Thomas became a professional trumpet player who had his own dance band in the Knoxville area for many years. He was also a Knox County band director, most notably at Carnes High School. Gene Collins also became a band director. He made the All-State Band on oboe 3 years while at Central.
I'm Gene Collins. I went to Central from 50 to 53. Went 3 years to Park Junior, 7, 8, and 9.
Okay.
And when I was in 9th grade, I was also playing in Knoxville High School band. Then I wanted to go to Central because it was a really fine band, and so that's what I did. But they came from Lenore City, Mascot. I lived in East Knox County. Well, I was supposed to go to Knoxville High.
Yeah. So Mr. Willis called your parents and encouraged them to have you come to Central?
Well, he let them know that I would be welcome if I did. I quit the band one time. I got mad at him and quit.
Oh, no,
When I got home, so I quit. My father said, "Oh, you're wrong. No, you didn't quit." I said, "Well, he was going to put me in the second band because I was late. And I'm not going to be in the second band." He said, "Yeah, you are. And you're going to do exactly what that man says. And you're going to hope that somewhere along the line you can redeem yourself," which I did. But no, it's after school rehearsal. Oh, I mean, I was late, like 30 minutes or something. You just didn't do that.
Fresh out of Central at age 18, Mr. Collins wanted to be a band director, but did not want to wait through 4 years of a college degree to get started. So he approached the Knoxville Parks and Recreation Department and convinced them to let him found the area's first community band. 51 years later, the group is still going strong. I asked Mr. Collins to describe Mr. Willis's style and the concept of band sound.
A lot of texture, a lot of transparency. You could hear each individual player. If you've got a lot of low reeds, you're going to get a real orchestral sound, a big organ sound. The big emphasis in those days was so that you at all time had as close to perfect intonation, balance, and blend as possible.
In short, the 1950s were extraordinary years for the band. Mr. Willis now had the complete support of the community, both musically and financially. The band rarely held fundraisers because the community, business leaders, and alumni provided for the band's needs. The band had developed a reputation as the most advanced in the area, and this excellence began to draw students from surrounding high schools. It was just a fact. If you were a truly exceptional player who wanted to perform with other such serious musicians, you found a way to attend Central.
We were from Central. We worked as hard as we, to maintain our position. And there was nobody going to beat us. I don't see how. We had it all. He could afford to have 5, 6, 7, 8 bass clarinets, contrabass clarinet, the very finest bassoons, really, really quality double horns, 4-valve baritone. I mean, he had the best of everything.
The June 1952 issue of School Musician magazine included this feature on Mr. Willis. This was a monthly department in this national magazine highlighting a noted music educator. The biographical sketch tells us that by now he had completed a master's degree at UT. The article points again to his role as supervisor of instrumental music for Knox County schools, as well as to the summer music camp he founded in Gatlinburg. He was also a board member of both the Tennessee Music Educators Association and of the Knoxville Symphony. The article concludes by describing Mr. Willis as a significant example of a teacher who was making America musical.
The 1952-1953 drum major was Tommy Graves, and the band also included Roger Tate, another Centralite who served as band director for many years in Anderson County. This band was selected to perform in Chattanooga for the Southern Music Educators Association. Being selected to perform for this prestigious 11-state group was the band's first recognition on a wider regional scene.
This photo from the 1953 annual shows Mr. Willis in his director's chair. He was also using it in 1960, and I still have the chair today at Gresham. I don't use it, however. It just seems wrong somehow, although it's still in excellent condition. 1953-1954 was truly a special year for the band. Central was selected by the Lions Club International to represent Tennessee at their national convention in New York in July 1954. Several local school board and Lions Club members accompanied the band. The group placed 4th out of 65 bands from the entire nation at the parade competition. The band received quite a bit of publicity from this award, as seen in these clippings. The 101 members on the trip evidently had to stand for 3 hours in pouring rain in their parade lineup position before stepping off down Fifth Avenue. After the parade competition, the group toured the sights of New York, attended a Giants-Phillies baseball game, and performed a concert at the Statler Hotel. The group then traveled to Washington, D.C., where Senator Albert Gore and Representative Howard Baker accompanied the group on tours of the Capitol and the White House. The group gave a concert on the steps of the Capitol and posed for this marvelous photograph before returning to Knoxville. We still have a large framed original of this in our archives today. Bands take performance trips often now. Indeed, there is an entire travel industry segment which organizes festivals for school groups in locations all over the world. However, in 1954, this was a unique event, and the band was met by hundreds of well-wishers upon their return to Fountain City. Interestingly, the band again visited New York in spring 2003, performing at the Statue of Liberty, seeing the sights, and visiting the scene of the September 11, 2001 tragedy. The 1954-1955 band seemed to have many excellent performers. The annual lists 5 students as being selected for the All-State Band. One of those was Leanne Hickman. Her brother Ralph was also a Central Band member, and another generation of Hickman children all played for us at Gresham and Central in the 90s. Leanne and Ralph both became accountants in the family firm.
In 1956, in recognition of almost 20 years of outstanding bands and so many awards, the Centralite was dedicated to Mr. Willis. The caption praises his sense of humor, his dash of seriousness, and the respect he had earned from the school and community. The 1956-1957 annual photo shows the band still wearing the uniforms from 1948, with the long calf-length skirts on the women. Keep in mind that for any of these annual photos that show the concert band rather than the marching band, we are only seeing the first band, not the second, training group. So, none of these pictures have really shown every single band student. Further, although it is now almost 20 years since Reba Inkelbarger and Martha Cox joined the concert band, there are still only 8 women out of the almost 60-piece band shown here.
Here's Charles Harrington on percussion. Mr. Harrington had a long history with Mr. Willis. We have mentioned the summer music camp that Mr. Willis and another teacher founded. Mr. Harrington began attending the Smoky Mountain Music Camp at a young age. At the right beside Mr. Willis is Bob Rush, founder of Rush's Music Store in Knoxville. Mr. Harrington furnished these wonderful photos dating from the early 1950s, before he was even in high school. I love these. What could be more nostalgic, more Americana, than a group of kids in 1953 at a summer music camp in the mountains? Mr. Harrington's father was in high school in the early 30s, during the time that Central did not have a band. He actually got a transfer and attended Knox High instead because he wanted to play in a band.
I'm Charles Harrington. I played in the band from 1954 through 1958 when I graduated. I'd played at Fountain City Elementary 3 or 4 years before going to Central. I did take private lessons from Bob Rush, and of course attended Smoky Mountain Music Camp. But of course I'd known Mr. Willis before going to high school because I carried his paper, probably while I was still in elementary school, and I think I carried it through my junior year in high school. One time we were going down a parade on Gay Street, and so we were, I don't remember where it started, but we figured, of course, he wouldn't be around, so we switched and started playing the Knoxville College Street Beat, which was kind of catchy, and would be, he turned right up on the sidewalk, so we all got demerits for our diversion. One special memory I have was, I guess, 56 band, and we were playing, I think, Italian and Algiers in the band competition, and Mr. Willis had told us several weeks before that we would have a 1 rating. He said he normally wouldn't tell a band that far ahead, but that band, I know when we play a Rossini Now number in East Tennessee Concert Band, I think back of that band and how good it was.
And we still have some of Mr. Willis's band festival judges sheets from the 1950s, including this one that is obviously the year Mr. Harrington remembers. As you can see, this judge gave the band a 1 in every category on every selection played. The judge's comments under the Outstanding Strong Points caption read, "A good job on 2 very difficult numbers. It takes good players and plenty of musicianship to perform these 2 pieces." There are several strong points here. The greatest, the director. Who wrote these highly complimentary words almost 50 years ago? The band director at Tennessee Tech. He would later come to UT in 1961 and become something of a legend himself. UT Band Director Emeritus, Dr. W.J. Julian. Dr. Julian remembers Mr. Willis well.
But I often went to O'Dell's concerts because they were outstanding, and O'Dell was a legend all over the state. He had one of the better bands in the country, but it was a mellow-sounding band. It wasn't a harsh. Yeah. They were always traditional pieces, and you had to be musical.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, we were good friends.
Yeah.
Before I came to Tennessee, yes. Yeah. Well, he was a very quiet person. He wasn't a loud person at all, very subdued, and always quite serious, although he had a keen sense of humor. I remember that. But I would come up to when I was at Tennessee Tech, I would come up to some of his concerts.
In the fall of 1957, one of the most interesting events of the entire O'Dell Willis era took place. At a football game that fall, Mr. Willis and his wife Hazel were presented with a token of appreciation from the community, a 1957 Chevrolet station wagon. Details about this event are sketchy. Band students from that era were not really involved in the project. Clippings show that several adults and former students were involved, including some from Mr. Willis's Harlan, Kentucky days. Although no mention is made of it, 1957 would have been the 20th anniversary of Mr. Willis's arrival at Central. I've even heard from more than one source that it was due to a desire to give financial assistance to the Willises. For whatever reason, it did indeed take place. V.C. Adcock and his wife Virginia even went on a Florida vacation with the Willises in the car the following summer.
Well, Joe Beatty, who at that time was running Beatty Chevrolet, was in the band. He played drums out of Central. And I'm sure he gave him a good deal. But they let O'Dell and Hazel go out and pick out whatever car they wanted.
But I just can remember, the good musicians that were in the band, like I mentioned a while ago, the 4 or 5 that were in the Knoxville Symphony from the late 50 bands, that Richard Trithall and Charles Goins and Alan Nichol and myself.
One of the most musically accomplished Knoxville natives, Richard Trithall, was a product of the Central Band program. He, along with country star Roy Acuff from the 1920s, is even depicted on the Knoxville Music History mural in downtown Knoxville. He performed with the Knoxville Symphony and studied composition with its conductor, David Van Vactor, even as a high school student. His long career as a composer and performer has seen an astonishing variety of styles. He later studied at Princeton, studied in Berlin under a Fulbright Fellowship, and won the Rome Prize in Composition from the American Academy in Rome. He remained in Rome as a composer and pianist and continues today at the American Academy as the director of its music program. In Knoxville for a brief visit, he kindly met me to pay tribute to his musical beginnings with O'Dell Willis.
I'm Richard Trithall. I was in the band, I think from 1953. That was my freshman year through I graduated in 1957. But I'd also worked with O'Dell at the Fountain City Grammar School, because he came out and taught us at least once or twice a week while the rest of the classes were directed by Mrs. Hagler. And I played clarinet at first, and then about the 7th grade, he moved me over to oboe, so I became an oboist. And so for 4 years, I was the first oboe of the band, and performed, also went to the all-state band clinics and all that kind of stuff. So it was a wonderful experience. And O'Dell was an absolutely marvelous instructor. He kept order in such a quiet, unassuming way. He ran a tight ship, a very tight ship, but all of us were very proud to be part of the band. When I came in the very first year, we went off to New York, and we marched down the 5th Avenue of New York. It was a blinding rain. I think that time, because in the marching band you didn't march with the oboe. I was playing bass clarinet something, and I remember the pads got so soaked you couldn't make a sound. But we were an excellent band, that was for sure. When we were dry, we were fine. And that was an example of the band that I entered, and we tried very hard to keep it up to that level. We felt kind of elite, and we enjoyed each other's company. What I noticed with him is, because at the same time I was working with David Van Vactor with the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra, and I was going to 2 rehearsals a week with David, as well as 5 every morning with O'Dell. And I would say that I didn't feel any difference in musicianship there. I mean, O'Dell was, he was a stickler for the same things that David was. I mean, they were both excellent, excellent musicians who knew how to get from whomever, I mean, O'Dell was working with kids, so he knew that. But he treated us as if we could play the way adults, you know. And he certainly, he had my utmost respect at the moment, and he still does. You know, there was never any doubt in my mind that this was the best band director in the country. You know, he had the ability to tell you, you're not cutting the mustard, and you didn't feel bad about it. You just said, well, I'm going to work hard. You didn't like say, well, I'll never be able to do it. What was funny, of course, with the oboe, I didn't march. He put me on cymbals, and I was playing, and we always had all those roll-offs and everything, and I would flash these things. And then he got the shortest guy in the band to play bass drum. And this, I'm sure, was O'Dell's sense of humor. But in addition to that human side and respect for him, I think as a professional who went on, somebody who went on in the musical world, and doing a number of different kinds of things, the fact is that I come back and I think of what he taught me and what he said to me. And it's still a Bible for me today. You know, there's not something that I had to unlearn. He told me the way it was, and I've been able to use that as a professional. That's saying a lot, I think.
It was time again for new uniforms. After the usual fundraising, they arrived in March 1958. The band had been selected again to represent the state at the Lions Club International Convention. This time the parade was in Chicago in July 1958. This photo from the band's collection has "Before Chicago" handwritten on the back, so this was probably posed in the new uniforms at the Presbyterian Church across the street from the school prior to the trip. The new uniforms had gray pants with red jackets and West Point style crossbelts. And here they are on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, July 9th, 1958.
Big, I guess, highlight of our thing at Central was our trip to Chicago, my senior year. In fact, we were invited to, I guess it was an International Lions Club parade. We got new uniforms just prior to going up there, and it was really a good memory.
Both Dr. Julian and Charles Harrington mentioned how much the UT band relied on former Central students.
And so many of the students from there were in our band.
This photo, furnished by Mr. Harrington, shows some 22 Central alumni in the 1959 UT band, including Charles Harrington in the very front with his drum. Others in the group include Roger Tate, Ralph Hickman, Sam Sharp, Richard Trithall, and Charles Goen. As the 1950s drew to a close, the band continued its earlier traditions. The ETSBOA Band Festival, now usually held at UT, was a strong focus each year. In 1959, Mr. Willis began storing all the judges' sheets from this festival in a folder which I discovered in a filing cabinet in our music library. The 1959 band received 2 2s and a 1 on Dedication by Franchiser, but this was followed up by straight 1s on Universal Judgment in 1960. However, before we can leave the 1950s, there are a few more stories to hear. First is Charles Sanders. Something of a Central High legend himself, he was the CHS chorus teacher for over 30 years, beginning in 1952.
I'm Charlie Sanders, former director of choral music at Central High School. I came here from California after having taught there for 2 years and taught at a summer music camp which was operated by Mr. O'Dell Willis. Went back to California and taught out my contract and was offered a job by Western Union Telegram, and I accepted it by Western Union. And since then, many nice things have happened here, particularly working with O'Dell, because he became my mentor. So I'd go to O'Dell and for counsel and for advice, and he monitored almost everything I did there for a while at my request. And he was not bashful about giving me advice either. So it was fun and a great experience for me. He was great with the way he communicated. He was very stern in his mannerisms when he was directing the band, and his silence was the loudest silence I've ever heard from anybody. Correct? I mean, he could sit there and stare at you and you could almost read the words coming out of his brain. But he coached me. I learned more from that man about teaching and about handling young people than all my experience in college.
In the spring of 1958, Mr. Sanders and Mr. Willis decided it was time that Central had a school song, or alma mater, and devised a plan to encourage students to compose one. Donita Barkley was a chorus student, and Charles Goen, a clarinet and piano player who were both in theory class when the assignment came.
My name is Charles Goen, and I am a graduate of Central High School, 1958. I went to the University of Tennessee, after which I went to Indiana University. I took a job at the University of Wisconsin in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and I taught there for 34 years and retired just 3 years ago and have returned back to my hometown here in Knoxville.
I'm Donita Hedgepeth Barkley. I graduated with the class of 58. Mr. Sanders and Mr. Willis were perfectionists. But because they instilled in us a desire to want to do our very best.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And to work harder than we had been working, or that we thought we could do. And that's the way that I think a lot of us got our professions and our love of music.
This was a class project that you had
It
been doing.
grew out of a class project.
And then in my mind, I thought I had submitted it, and then you liked that one. See, I don't know that I knew that this was a project for the alma mater at the time. Did you keep that from us, perhaps?
Yes,
That's what I think happened.
Sort of. I don't remember just exactly. When did you sign the words to it?
I think I had the words, and then
Did you give them to...
Charles adapted the music to the words.
Okay.
Because I can
couldn't
remember sitting at the piano and trying to make the melody go with the words.
been a long time, folks.
47 years. If I recall correctly, did we not have a presentation here on stage
We sure
with
did.
band and choral combination?
We sure did.
In which it was presented for the first time.
I wrote the arrangement for the choir. Mr. Willis then put it together, and there was the band arrangement. And from then on out, it was played at the football games, and quite often he would start his concert. What became a sort of an identity for the school.